This is Claudette Milner, host of A Matter of Interpretation. And today we have a guest, Cherise Lane. She is a domestic abuse survivor and advocate. Cherise, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I want to start out looking at, and if you would give us just a short, brief bio of you and your personal experiences.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having me on the show today. I am a survivor of domestic violence. I am an advocate currently, so I speak on behalf of myself and women who are survivors and also who are going through. I have been through domestic violence both physically and verbally through a previous marriage where I had 2 children. I was married for 4 years and I was in the relationship for 7. Met the abuser when I was 19, very young and not educated. I found myself going through the ins and outs of the relationship and learning how to not only to take care of myself, but how to get out safely, and not having the resources were at that time were really rough. So my advocacy is to let women know that there are resources and how to speak up and find those resources. I am currently remarried and have 4 beautiful children, and just also to let women know that, and men, because men are also victims of abuse as well, and let them know that there's always help for them.
I want to go back to your relationship with your ex-husband, because I think it's so important. You were with him for 3 years. And so discuss his behavior during those 3 years, and because a lot of people believe that if you formulate a relationship with someone, that it's easier to reconcile in your mind those moments that kind of trigger or show that they may be violent at a later time. So I want you to just kind of take us back to the relationship and how you all met.
Absolutely. We met at a job together, and we started off as friends. We had a great relationship where we got to know each other daily. We spent time together, and the triggers that I saw, but I have to look back at because I didn't notice them as triggers while in the relationship. There are things that I learned after that I now can look back and say the aggression, the tone of voice, the controlling, whether it be financial or vehicles or where to live or what to buy. Those were the triggers, and they were very subtle. So they're not what people would say a slap in the face, whether physical or verbal. They weren't like red flags. They were very, very subtle, and to the point where you can be very passive and say, okay, well, I can look at it a different way, or that's something I can work on, when you're not, as I was not grown into that as a child. I saw a different, my parents raised us different, I would say. So I didn't see that, and I was like, okay, well, this could be okay. It's not hurtful to me. So his aggression would come out verbally, mainly verbally, and loudly when he didn't get his way. But over time, 95% of our time in a relationship, we were friends. We got along. We traveled. We went to school together. We went to the University of Toledo, and our friends and family all got together, but our time, like the 5% of the time where we disagreed, was in home. So on the outside looking in, everyone thought we were fine.
Let me ask you this, because a lot of women will be watching the show, and a lot of women will be listening to what you're saying. And I want you to do a checklist for me, because you talked about, and a lot of young women, because I talk to a lot of middle school students, high school students, and it seems like the triggers are so subtle that they don't recognize it until they find themselves in an uncomfortable position.
Absolutely.
So kind of give a checklist to my audience and say, these are the things that you need to look for, even if you're in a long-term relationship, that may come up, that these are triggers for that this person may suffer some emotional trauma themselves, but these are things that you need to be aware of.
Okay. Every relationship is different, and everyone's triggers will come at different times. I would say when they say trust your instinct, when you have that feeling and you feel like you're walking on eggshells, what you say to him, what you wear, where you go, or you have to be so careful of your friends. If you find yourself telling your friend, no, because I'm not sure how he's going to feel. If you have that feeling, something is not right. If you, the checklist could be as easy as you're doing something every day and you find yourself not really comfortable doing that anymore because out of fear of what he's going to say or even do. Listen to yourself and maybe reevaluate the situation, because it's happening for a reason. It's really just that voice of reasoning, and you have to listen to it.
Now, when you hear that voice and you sense that something is just not right, and maybe you're not married to this person, or maybe you are a teenager or a middle school person, then what's the next step that you do?
The next step is to be verbal, and be as verbal as you can be. Our fear as women is always, what are people going to say about me? They're going to say, well, why did you do that? Well, what did you do for him to do that? The judgment 9 times out of 10 doesn't even happen. And when you get with someone and you tell them, normally it's going to be okay. And when you hear that from someone, that reassurance is all you need. So the thing would be is to get away as soon as you can, make the decision that you're better than that and you can leave. Most people think they cannot leave. You can leave. You can voice. You have a voice, and it's very strong, and you have to be strong enough to use it. And it took me a long time to be sure of the voice that I have, and using it as an advocate is just so much power that I have, and that makes me happy every day. Young girls, especially middle school, because that's where it starts. As you mentioned, it starts at middle school, and they're not sure. They don't have that strength, that voice to go on. Counselors, reach out to a counselor, reach out to a teacher, reach out to a janitor, reach out to an aunt, a neighbor, and if you can't reach out to a parent, if you feel that you can't, because 9 times out of 10 you can, but if you cannot go home and voice that to your parent, reach out, because the help is there. The help is definitely there.
Are there resources for that age, that particular age? I know a lot of times at church we have groups, and we have, temporary situations, workshops, but no follow-up there. So what resources are available to the teens of Detroit as far as referral systems and those kind of things, where they can go to talk to somebody, or they can get help with a situation if they fear getting out of it, or if somebody is aggressive? There's so many things like date rape and those kind of things that young people are dealing with. So where do they get help?
The first thing would be counselors at the school. They all have the information. They need to take the first step and go privately and talk to maybe an assistant principal and ask them for counseling information. There's also 211. If a young girl has a cell phone and she dials 211 and she tells even just a little about what's going on, you do not have to provide details. There's information for teens and for women to get help, an escape out, just maybe some advice. Maybe you want someone to listen to what happened that day. You can call 211 and they will be there for you.
Let me also ask, because you were with this person for 3 years, and I know some people looking at the show are going to say, well, why did you marry him? So why did you marry him?
I would say I married him because at that time I saw him as a protector. When we met, he was very defensive. I was young, as I mentioned, I was 19, and we were friends, and we always went out. And when I look back, I married him because we had a majority of great times, and that overlooked the negativity, and the abuse came the day I left. So when someone says, oh, I didn't even know you were in an abusive relationship, because I wasn't physically, but mental and verbal, absolutely, I was. And when I left, I was then in a physically abusive relationship because we were still married. So I married him because he was my friend, and I was raised in the church, and I felt as though that this could be my husband. So after being with him for years, and and then we married, and then we had children. So that's why I married him. He was a friend, and I confided in him, and I trust him at that time, and I depended on him to be the man of the house.
And I appreciate you being transparent, because we're trying to reach women who are in this particular situation, and they don't talk about it for the most part. It's hidden in church. Although you're a woman of faith, it's not readily talked about at church.
Correct.
So everybody thinks that they're alone, that they have to hide this issue, that they can't come out and talk about it, because if they go back, I think the biggest fear in working with women who have been abused is, if they go back, what is everybody going to say?
That is true.
And most times, as you know, women go back maybe 2 or 3 times before that they just trigger and they say, no, I can't take this anymore.
That is correct. And what I learned at the YWCA of Detroit is that women go back 7 times. Mm-hmm. I believe my number was very close, whether it was me leaving for a day and staying with family, whether it was leaving for a month. I left and I came back. You're comfortable, your clothes are there, your job is there. Whatever your reason may be, you may go back until, like my grandmother always said, and you keep banging yourself at that door until you figure out how to open it. So it's the lesson that I had to learn, and my lesson may have taken me longer than some. It may have been shorter than some, but everyone's path is different, and no one in domestic violence should ever be judged, no matter what the situation, because only the 2 people in the situation really know what's going on, because even my mother didn't know 100% of what was going on, yet she knew a lot. But you still have the church who you want to go to, but you don't want to open up that floodgate to the church that you've been raised in to look at you and have a different outlook on how, view you differently.
Because there's that conversation with the church of you don't divorce because it's not appropriate. We don't really want to hear that you're going through drama because we have our own that we're hiding. And then the church, you know, it used to be you go up in the front of the church and you confess your sins, and then all of a sudden, instead of people embracing you, they're in the parking lot talking about you. And I keep saying on a consistent basis that the church has got to become more like Jesus. They have to become more compassionate toward people. Because
Absolutely.
people have to heal and they have to be able to discuss. And unfortunately, a lot of times there's no privacy even when you talk to the minister.
Correct.
And so people judge you because why didn't she make it work? What did she do in order for this person to abuse her? And so I want to go back to the trigger points after the marriage. Okay. You decided to marry him because you loved him, you were friends. And then what happened after the marriage? What changed in his behavior?
His behavior became completely disrespectful. I still had respect for myself, and he no longer did. So they say you lose yourself in a marriage, and I tried my best not to. My focus was on my children. And there was a time where I came home and I said, I just need an answer. And they always say, be careful what you ask for. The answer was a physical altercation, and that was the last time we were together. And that was my answer to leave, because I could not raise two boys and let them see that that was okay. And it's not okay for abuse to happen to anyone. And to continue in a marriage and say, well, I have to do this because he's the father of my children. Some say that, and that is their answer. But for my situation, I had to be better for them. And I wanted them to look up to me and say, thank you for doing what you did. I know it was rough, and whether it's 20 years from now. So the physical altercation started that day, the day I left. And I don't remember a lot of the marriage, but I remember that day as if it was yesterday. And it sticks for a reason. It's so that I can continue to grow from there. And I don't look back, but I do live and try to let myself and my children and other women know that it's okay to leave. It's okay to start a new life that you're happy in.
So, can you talk a little bit about the impact on kids? That because most people come to the assumption that if you leave, it's going to hurt the kids. They're going to be without their father. And I know there are situations where women leave and they have to cut all ties because the kids may have been abused. But talk a little bit about the impact of staying on kids. That women that you counsel, that they stay in the situation or they go back on a continuous basis to the situation. What happens to the kids?
The kids are affected more than the adults. The adults have more, the adults have, well, let's just stick with the kids, I would say. The kids don't have the physical strength or the education to rely on. We're their parents. We have to do that. So they are, you see the kids going to school and they act out. And then you wonder why. What's going on at home? And that's the first thing the teacher says. Are there any problems going on at home? And then you have to look at yourself and go, well, maybe, but I don't want that to be said. So women have to realize that the home is where things start. Kids also have to go to therapy so that they can let out what they see. And you have to be careful, because children will say to people what they hear. They may say, you know, what their dad is telling their mom, that's maybe verbalized on the bus to children, to boys talk. The way boys talk to young girls on the bus is maybe how dad's talking to mom at home.
Right.
So you really have to be careful, because the impact is very strong. And that's another thing. I had 2 boys with my ex-husband, so I did not want them seeing, and as I say, I can only control me, but I took my children away because I wanted to be better. I didn't take them away from him as far as divorce, like visitation. Mm-hmm. I was raised with my father and my mother, and I saw them all the time. And I believe that a man who is here on this earth should be with his children. Our altercations were ours, and I say let it be that. But when coming to your children, you can still be a great dad. You just may not be a great husband. So give that chance to your children. And my ex-husband is with the children, but they still have some issues, because even though my youngest son at the time was 1, he still knows. So you think, oh, he was too young. A lot of people say it's a baby. They know, they can feel it. And so you have to just make sure that every decision that you're making, if you have children, is for the better of yourself and for your children. So to leave, I would say, earlier is better than staying and saying, I'm staying for my children. You're hurting them in the end. You could be hurting them.
I think a lot of times with women and domestic violence, or women with other verbal, we think that it'll get better. We think that he'll change. We want to believe that we married this person, we had faith and trust in this person, and it's like a broken glass. And it's like your life is shattered at that point, and all your hopes and dreams that you put into this relationship are gone. And it's hard to come to a conclusion with that. It's hard to leave. And so you had recently said you left a couple of times. The first time you left, how long was it?
Maybe 2 days. I probably left for 1 or 2 days.
And that's when he got physically abusive? No. The first time I left was just verbal. We may have gotten into a verbal altercation, and I left. I went to my mom's, and I came back in a day or 2. The physical was after marriage and after years of being together. And we had an altercation in public. And as I said, when you argue with someone behind closed doors and everything it's solved the next day, or you feel it's resolved, but when it boils out into the street and you feel as though now the whole world is exposed to every pain that you've ever felt, that was the day. That's when the light bulb came on. Let me ask you this. When the light bulb came on, when it was exposed to the public, when you couldn't hide it anymore, was there a sense of relief that now I can move away from this?
You know, I think it was. Now, and that's the first time someone's asked me that. Yeah. There was a sense of relief. And I sat and I talked to my mom, and I sat and I talked to my grandmother, and I'm blessed to still have them in my life. And they, it's always now what?
Right, because once that's out, you can move on.
Right.
You can make the decisions that are okay, because what it seems like, what it looks like, is that as long as you're hiding, you're doing everything for everybody else. I can't let my mom know. I can't let my grandma know. I can't let the kids know.
Right.
I've got to suffer in silence through all of this. But then when the exposure comes, it's like a fountain that has been
Correct.
bubbling up, and then all of a sudden it's just running.
That's right. It does. It runs and runs, and you have to figure out a way to pick up all these pieces. And it's like you're starting a new life, and you don't really know which direction to go, but you're like, it's okay, you know, and you're like, but I'm going to pick it up, and everything is going to be just fine.
Right, because I've told everybody.
Exactly.
And now everybody's aware.
Right.
So if my kid says something, I don't have to shush him up.
Exactly.
Because he no longer has to lie about the situation. And I think that's another time. You put the kids in a situation that they go to school, they're acting out, and somebody says, well, what's wrong? And you've told them, be silent.
Absolutely.
And so their hurt and their pain is silent because of your silence.
That's so true.
And so I want to go now to, and you expressed to me before that you went to your mom's, you went to your grandma's house, and then after that situation, you went to the shelter.
I did.
And tell us about why you made the decision to go to the shelter.
Absolutely. I found myself hitting rock bottom. I had, after my marriage, I was in my own home. I was working and had a car, and my kids were in school and going to daycare, and things were actually very good for us. And I came home one evening, and my house was broken into, and had an altercation with my ex-husband, and my car was just vandalized. So we went from back at my mom's house to no vehicle, and so I felt stuck. I felt trapped, and because I was there, and because that's where he would pick them up for his visitation, he knew where I was, but I was not in my own. I was at my grandmother's, and I did not want to have that situation at her home. I respected her more. And that day was so rough when I had to tell her I was leaving, because my children and her get along so well. So well. And I made the phone call to the shelter that day, and I told them about the things that were going on, and she said, give me a call right back. And I said, okay. And no, I'm not going to call back. It's okay. I'll call a friend, I'll call, and you're debating, because maybe that wasn't the call I should have made. And I was just sitting there, and I called right back. And I told her again about what happened, and at that time I believe she was checking for space. And she said, how soon can you be here? I had called the YWCA of Detroit, and I said, well, I'm going to wait for my son to get home from school, and I can be there in about 45 minutes. I called my sister, and she came to pick me up, and there started a brand new life. And it's not the place that you ever dream of going. You never want to say, I lived in a women's shelter for battered women. I never thought that I would say that. But now I'm proud to say that they helped me to become who I am and where I am. And I will forever be in their debt.
I think there's a stereotype about being in a shelter. And I think that because of that stereotype, because you don't want to go, you are at a crossroads, because you're saying, okay, I don't want to go to a shelter. I don't want to expose my kids to that, but on the other side, you're saying it's that fight. I don't want to expose my kids to any more violence.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to expose my kids to verbal abuse. And I want my kids to get healthy. And sometimes you have to love your kids enough to take that move.
That's correct.
And it is confidential. And I say this because I did my VISTA tour in legal aid and domestic violence back in Kansas. I won't say how many years ago, but it is a confidential place. And sometimes if you're in a situation where you know that somebody may know the shelter, because police officers and various people know where the shelter
Correct.
is, they can move you. They can literally move you to a safe place, to a safe hotel. They can move you out of state.
That is true.
And I had one librarian that every day she took a little bit of her clothes to the shelter, and she had already gotten a library job in another state. And when she made that last transition, we put her on a plane and sent her to her new job. Because domestic violence, and I heard you say something earlier, and you said, I grew up in a two-family home, and when I was with this person, I wasn't educated at the time.
Correct.
And because you were in school. But domestic violence crosses all areas. And
Absolutely.
There's no education that can give you self-worth.
Right.
It can give you the master's, the PhD, the legal, but it can't give you the self-worth that I get from my personal experience with God, where I know my worth, simply because by the grace of God, He has allowed me to know that I don't have to be in an abusive situation, that I want a man who loves me as God loves him. But I think all of us are not at that point, because we are, my girlfriend likes to call it, in transition. We're growing into our faith, and we're
Yes.
growing into Christianity, where we know without a doubt that we have a Savior who loves us unconditionally.
Correct. And everyone's transition comes at a different time.
And in a different way.
Yes.
And that aha moment, that last time when you've had enough. And because we don't want to say, as you said before, everybody's transition happens. Everybody gets that moment where they know that they need to make a change in their life, that they have a destiny within themselves, and that until they heal, they can't move forth.
Absolutely.
And so I want to talk about your kids' experience in the shelter, because I want to dispel a lot of myths about the shelter, where women think that, you know, you go there and your kids are going to suffer, or you go there and they're not going to learn, because I know that they have family counseling and they have individual counseling. So I want to talk about your kids' experience in the shelter and your experience.
Okay. And that was readily available for them. I was told from day one that would be available, counseling, and I made sure I took advantage of that. There was counseling for myself, but what I noticed there was, we're going to give you what you need, and then what are you going to do with it? At that time, you don't look at it that way. You look at it as if, are you going to walk with me the whole way? And I need help. I'm in a desperate state, and I just want you to tell me kind of what to do next, because I don't know. And I had, my counselor said, I'm going to give you this information. Take it and quietly decide, what is it that you need to do? What is it you need to change? And then I'm going to give you a counselor for your children and a therapist. At that time, I would see my kids go to counseling and therapy, and it was in play form. And there was a therapist there, and she was great with them. she was great with children in therapy, and they loved her. They would look forward to her coming there, and so did the parents, because that was a little bit of a relief. It let me sit quietly and watch them in a peaceful state that you realize they may not have been getting before or at home during the marriage or during the relationship. And they would say things to the therapist, and it was just a release for them. And my oldest son would come back and say, it was great, we talked about this, and she asked me how I felt, and I was like, well, that's wonderful. And then it would help him with school as well, because well, how is that going to help you in school, and how could you work with other children in school or with your teachers? Because they have a hard time when being in a shelter and going to school, because it's confidential, but depending on where you are in a shelter will depend on where your kids go to school.
Right.
I made the choice to not go to a local school and just walk. Because of transportation, I went out of the shelter district and took my son to a different school, just so he could kind of be away and not feel that sense of not only am I in a shelter, but I'm going to a school with other kids and I'm getting teased and things like that.
Right.
So it was confidential, and it wasn't until years later that he actually even knew he was in a shelter. As I said, he would call it the building, and but they still look back, and my youngest said, remember the child care at the building, and the lady was so nice, and they played, and they taught them how to clean up. They had cleanup time and playing and preparing food, and they had churches coming in and having pizza night and popcorn and activities for the kids. So it's not so structured where kids hate that part of their life. I would say my kids had a wonderful time while we got our life together there. So it just depends on how you deal with it. You can take it and move on properly with it, or kind of soak in it. But I think children taking on the therapy and getting the counseling and moving on and using that in their everyday life is definitely helpful in the shelters.
Because I think too, and you said one pointed thing, you said, they asked me how I felt. And I think sometimes when you're in a traumatized situation yourself, that you're so busy putting Band-Aids on your feelings and your emotions that you forget to ask the kids, how are you?
Correct.
Because although you try to shelter them from whatever's going on, you try to protect them, because our job as parents, as mothers, is to protect our kids from any hurt and harm. We never know what they see and how they feel about it. And if we're keeping it shush and they're keeping it shush, then all of their anxiety and pain, and we're not minimizing, and I don't want you to think we're minimizing what happens in the shelter, because there is structure, there are rules.
Absolutely.
But there's structure and rules in everything. But when you're there, you are looking at things in a very different light, and you're being able to deal with issues like finances and budgeting, and they make you accountable, because a lot of women, their major thing for not leaving a situation is financial.
Yes, it is.
I've never worked. I don't have any skills. I have to suffer through this until I get my kids to school, and then I have to continue because now I'm older and I can't get a job.
True. Because
I don't have any job skills. So the shelter offers financial counseling.
It does.
And budgeting, and those helping with apartments and helping with food stamps. And I remember when I worked there, the first thing that we did was make sure that women who had no source of income immediately got some source of income in their hands.
Correct.
Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to stay longer. It doesn't mean that they won't go back, but it's a realization that if you have a husband that makes good money and you're used to a certain lifestyle, that unless you have resources, you tend to go back quicker.
Correct. Because I was, I worked full time, went to school, and kids in daycare, rental homes. We had a business. So when everyone is different, you know, some are not educated, some are educated. As we mentioned earlier, it's not always, there are doctors and lawyers. There are women who go to court every day and help other women with domestic violence, and yet that same lawyer goes home and deals with it herself. That's where the eyes and the ears need to be open, because she's fighting for women, and who's fighting for her? You know, those are things that have to be done and said and not judged. Because we always think, well, she knew, she was educated to it. Yeah, but who was her advocate? Who helped her in the need? Who helped her children? So at any point, you have to be able to listen. That's all. When I have family and then my husband, he listens. And that part just takes the cake. And, you know, having someone to just listen and understand and be open to who you truly are. As I mentioned earlier, when you're walking on those eggshells, when you don't have to walk on those anymore, you can truly be yourself, there's such happiness in that.
And I think another point you made, and you said you were 19, and I think at 19, and many women get married at 19 and they're very self-assured about who they are and what they want from a mate. But a lot of times when you're 19, you haven't really discovered who you are.
Absolutely not.
So you don't have a checklist for what this person should have.
Correct.
And unfortunately, most, because my mother didn't, she gave me a checklist for a husband, educated, money, you know, be able to take care of yourself. And of course she said go to school and have education.
Right.
But we forget about marry somebody that loves God.
Right.
Because if this person loves God, then he will treat you as Jesus treats him. And that's not at the top of our list, and that's not at the top of our mother's list, because most of our mothers want us to be more successful than them, but they want also for us to have a provider.
Right.
And what you said earlier was he was my protector.
Correct.
And so not looking at a different framework. And you grew up in a two, and I want to touch on that a little bit, and this may be difficult, but you had a two-family home. Did you think that he was the protector as your dad was the protector for your family?
Looking back, yeah, I guess so. My dad made sure no harm came to our house. And as a young girl, you love your father for that.
Right.
You feel safe. So when my ex-husband made sure no harm came to our home, I felt safe until he wasn't in a right place with himself. Then the harm turns. So you feel safe with this person until it comes on yourself. So yeah, I do. I would say that I wouldn't put him on the same level as a father, because I had a father.
Right.
And but the protection, yes, I do feel that men should take care of their home. They should protect their home. And yes, he did that.
A couple of times you've said that he wasn't right with himself. what was going on with him that was different?
To this day, I would say I probably still don't know. I just really feel as though as a child, in his growing up, things just weren't the way he would want them to be. I had a two-parent home. He says he didn't. After maybe elementary or middle school, he saw a lot of abuse. I didn't. He had a lot of personal issues with health and mental things in his family. I didn't. So when things like that would come up and I would see that in the family, it was new to me. And they dealt with it in ways that I've never seen. But you know, I've never been the type to judge. That's just how their family got along. And they were all friendly to me. His family was always friendly to me, and we all got along. And but when it comes to growing up and becoming a man and your wife, if his mother and father maybe didn't have that, he didn't have that to go off of. Whereas I had a different view of how I wanted to be married. So that's where we clashed. So upbringing can definitely be a huge part of the reason why some marriages don't work.
Right. Did he ever show accountability, or did he ever seek help for the issues
during
or afterward? Because you said that he spends a lot of time with the kids or has visitation.
Yes, he does. During, no. He would say, honestly, he doesn't want people to tell him how to live his life. And, okay. But there was, after we were separated, he asked one time if I would go and seek counseling. And it didn't work. My heart was no longer there.
Okay, so you leave the shelter, and you go through the experience with the shelter, and what happens next? Because our viewers want to know, if they're in this situation and they go to the shelter, and you already had a job and those kind of things, so what's the next step after the shelter?
Well, it's different. During that time, being in the shelter, I actually lost my job because I lost my vehicle, so I couldn't get to work. So you have to look for employment. You have to make sure that you're okay with yourself and you're safe. So I actually, while in the shelter, I started a cleaning company. And but you look for the employment, you look for the funds, you look for places, and I found a 2-family flat home, and I moved out with the children. I continued taking them to school. I saved up money and bought a car, and they were excited, of course, because no more long walks to school. Or getting a ride by family or friends, which was so helpful to keep them into the school that I chose for them. But you have to keep going because it can get hard. When you leave that shelter, you don't have those counselors or even the other women who are there to talk to, and the children don't have the other children there every day. So it's just you and your children and the next path. You have to look forward as to what to do and how to get financially stable. So everything you learn in the shelter, you have to take out. So if you're not taking on that advice, it can get rough. And life itself is gonna bring you ups and downs, and you just have to be prepared for that. I've just been fortunate enough to stay in contact with the shelter, and you know, I like I said, I'll always be forever thankful for them for being there and giving us the resources. The one thing that I do, you know, they had a support group there, but you can't go back when you leave to just go for support. So I did start my own support group for women who come out of a shelter, and you still need an ear. Maybe you don't have a friend to talk to, or a mother, or friends. So I do have a support group, and so I constantly am, you know, just trying to go forward at all times. And then you work at success for your children every day, and then you go through the courts, make sure everything is structured so that there is no derailment, there is no disagreements. If you have to go through the courts for PPOs, if you have to go through the courts for whether it's divorce, visitation, everything, there is always the help, the resources, and they're there to help you. Once you are a domestic violence survivor, you're always going to have the help, but you have to, you know, be willing and have a voice and go out and help as well. So
let me ask you this. I'm assuming you work by or you do it by referral. By
referral, yes.
Okay. So what if you were in, how long have you had this group?
Since 2011.
Okay. So what if you're a woman and you're listening to the show, and you've been to the shelter, you're a survivor, you're living your life, and yet you don't have somebody you can talk to that really understands what's going on. Can they contact you?
Yes, they can contact me personally. And then we meet every Wednesday in the local community, which is very confidential, but I can be reached. I can also be reached through the YWCA. They actually have my contact information, and they would just ask for Sharice and that support group that I have.
Okay. Because I wanted to make sure that there was an avenue of support. And are there other support groups?
There are. There are other support groups throughout the city. And again, you can contact 211, and you would give them your address or zip code, and then they would refer you to the one that's closest to you.
Okay. I want to go, and I want to backtrack a little bit, because we all know that there is elderly abuse.
Yes.
There are men. And I had the opportunity to meet one that was being abused by his spouse. And I had him tell me that the skillet accidentally fell out of her hand and hit him on the head. Because men are more secretive than women, because it's not macho to admit that your wife is beating on you. Some parents, some elderly also suffer abuse, and so is the Y open to other people, men that are abused, or is there a separate identity for or organization for men that are being abused?
It would be separate for men. The YWCA, so of course the W for women. So it's for the women and the children, but you can contact the YMCA for the men. And if they are in need of help, of course, it would be there for them. But we tried, because you have women who, of course, may be abused by the men, so you have to separate that, of course. And but yes, YMCA of Detroit, or whatever city or state that you're in.
Okay. And since we are aired in many countries, and there are women who still are being abused on a daily basis, and they think that this is all right, it's their culture, it's It's their men being their men. And there are women here, of course, that are in this cycle of domestic violence. And we call it the cycle of violence. How do we get, if you choose to stay in this relationship, how do we break the cycle of abuse so that your son, because you're for whatever reason, you want to stay in this relationship, what do we do for the young men who are seeing this on a continuous basis, but in all your heart you love your children and you want them to be healed and you want them to be able to go? Because, you know, we have Al-Anon for the kids, and what do we have? What is there for?
You do have your church. If you don't have your church, you have a neighborhood church. You have neighbors. You have to have a different outlet. If you're going to stay, find a different outlet for your children. Put your children in a youth group and let your children get out of your environment. They cannot sit at home with you because you chose to stay and take the abuse. Find a school friend that they can confide in. Find a community center in your neighborhood and try to get them in a free program if finances don't allow you to put them in the karate, gymnastics, or what have you. They have to stay busy and out of the streets or whatever community that they're in so that they don't get into negative things. So I was raised in the youth group as well. We are always on retreats and things like that, so I can still look back at that, and now I put my son in the same thing. He's constantly busy, and if I can't, I'll ask a sister, a mother, someone, can you please take on, you know, an activity or a camp or some information. Kids have to remain in a positive environment.
Okay. And Sharice, I want to give you the opportunity to give the contact information for the support group, as well as to give the contact information for the Y.
Absolutely. The contact information, you can contact Mrs. Curtis France at the YWCA of Detroit. The phone number shall be listed at the bottom of the screen. I do believe it's 313-861-5300. The support group is Beauty in Disguise, and if you contact the Y, you can get the referral from them so that it's confidential. All women coming through the support group, and if you can't meet on Wednesdays, we can definitely get information to get to you, or if you just need a listening ear, you can reach me that way.
Okay. I want to end the show, and thank you, Sharice, for being here representing the YWCA of Detroit. I want to say to all women, you don't have to stay in an abusive situation. God did not make you to be beat on or to be verbally abused. God did not make anyone, man or woman, to be abused. This is a very delicate situation, and we want to be able to assist through the Y here in Detroit with getting your life back on track so that you can give your kids and your life the opportunity to heal. We don't advocate a divorce, but I do say that you need to remove yourself from that situation and pray about it, and just let God make the changes that He needs to make in both individuals and in your kids. We thank you for viewing the show. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.